Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming on to our edition of Learn at Lunch. We actually non-lunch hour, but with Ross Duran, he's our mental health counselor here on campus. And today he's going to be talking to us about mental health awareness, support, and education. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat and I can read it off. Or at the end, I believe he'll do a Q&A as well. So without further ado, go ahead, Ross.
All right, perfect. Well, let me get my screen shared here. All right. Does everything look okay? See the PowerPoint okay? Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Hung. As Hung said, my name is Ross Duran. I'm the health and wellness counselor here for the OSU-OKC campus. So excited to be here. Just get the opportunity to spend a few minutes of your time speaking about mental health, obviously about the awareness, support, and education regarding that. I think mental health is really a topic that we talk about a lot, especially nowadays, kind of in our post-COVID pandemic world. But I don't think we can really ever have too much awareness about that. So I appreciate you all taking the time to be on this call and just learn a little bit more about the topic. All right, so just a little bit about me. If you haven't met me, I feel like most people on the call have, but I'm a social worker by trade. I received my MSW in May of 2020. I also became licensed through the state of Oklahoma as an LMSW, which is a licensed master social worker, in May of 2020 as well. I'm under clinical supervision for my licensed clinical social worker program, which should be done here in just a few months. I'm very excited to be wrapping up with that. And previous to that, I have about 10 years experience total working in the social work field in a variety of areas, things from mental health. I've worked with individuals who are coming out of incarceration, reintegrating back into the community, worked with food insecurity here in Oklahoma City, as well as doing some political advocacy at the capitals for some of our really most vulnerable populations here in the state of Oklahoma. My main role here at OSU-OKC is to really support mental health and emotional needs for really faculty, staff, and students here on campus. We do that through a variety of means, primarily like individual therapy and counseling, educational events similar to this. I also can provide resources to individuals on campus that may need them, just really work to meet those specific needs. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit what I do here on our campus. So what are our goals today? Sometimes I think about an agenda, but I also think for today, we can think about what do we want to take from this? And I think what's really important is to always have a better understanding about what mental health is, how that's ever evolving and changing, and then how do we apply this to understand this understanding that we have and gain to our interactions with others. So how do we take our understanding about mental health to better understand how other people function? And secondly, to be equipped on how we can take care of ourselves and our own mental health. We tend to really put that on the back burner a lot of times. And so understanding how we can make sure that we're doing that successfully is really important as well. So those are kind of two things that I hope through our time today that you'll have a better understanding of, a better takeaway of. And just like Hung said, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat box. I can't always see when someone's like waving their hand. So just if you have a question, throw it in there and I'll make sure to answer it at the end. So what is mental health? That's a great question, right? It's one of those things that I think that, when we think about something like the COVID-19 pandemic, this has been something that's been promoted heavily, right? We're seeing people talk about this all the time. You hear people on the news talk about it. You hear, now we're seeing it on social media. But it goes even back further than that, right? It goes back years and years and years and decades. I've worked in the mental health field for a really long time. And if you press me for a definition, I'm not sure I could have given you a definition. Like, I know what it is, but defining that can be difficult. So for our time here today, like, I think it is really important that we establish a definition for it so that we can really kind of have a baseline understanding of what mental health is. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life. Big wordy definition, right? I think that sometimes at the university setting, I think of this as kind of like an academic definition, like it's really wordy. But I also think it shows how diverse and how intense just the field of mental health is and how much goes into that. That being said, I'm pretty simple. Like, I prefer things that are straight to the point, that aren't really wordy. So if you need a simple definition, mental health refers to the health of our mind. So you might take that sentence and you're like, man, you wasted all of our time by going over this really long sentence when you could have just said, switch the words around, and it really means just the health of our mind. Well, it does. But at the same time, we know that if I use the term mind, that there's a lot of things that go into that, right? Our thinking, our acts, even our physical body is controlled by that. So for the sake of today, we can think of mental health as how healthy is our mind functioning. So what kinds of things contribute to mental health? Is it something that just comes out of the blue? Is it something that someone in my family has a mental health concern, so I'm going to be affected by that? Is it something that I do to myself? The answer to all of those can be yes, or the answer to all of those can be no. So when we generally characterize mental health, we think of four main areas that are as contributing factors to our mental health. So our life experiences, our lifestyle, our biological factors, and our family history. So life experiences are things, just like it says, things that we've gone through, things we've experienced, maybe our work, our finances. Money is a big form of stress for many, many people. Trauma that we've experienced in life. When we think about military veterans or first responders, it's something we think about quite a bit as far as mental health goes. This would fall under life experiences that individual's had. Secondly, we also look at lifestyle. These are more like choices that we make. All right, what's our diet look like? What are we exercising? Are we sleeping enough? Are we making risky choices? All of those things are things that contribute to our mental health, but are a lifestyle choice. Additionally, we'll look at biological factors. What things tend to boil down to is our anatomy factors, right? Like how are things in our brain? Do we have any chemical imbalances? What do our genetics look like? Those are all things that can absolutely contribute to mental health as well. And lastly, we look at family history. And I think when I meet with a lot of the individuals here on our campus, this is one I hear a lot, right? My dad had a mental health concern, or all these generations in my family have had mental health concerns. So I have a family history of these issues, and then we can see them as contributing factors to what's going on with us now. So when we look at these, don't think that these are the only contributing factors to mental health. They're just the four main ones that we look at. So I think when we think about mental health too, it's really interesting that it tends to be one of the most misunderstood health conditions or health realms, I guess you could say. By misunderstood, we also have a lot of stigma that surrounds it. Luckily, that's changing. The kind of further we go along in time, we're seeing less and less stigma. We're seeing less and less. There's more awareness, so to speak, about mental health and what it is. I think part of that tends to be just because we can't see the issue. If you break your arm or you have a certain physical health issue, you can see that. Other people can't see what's going on internally with us. But there can be a lot of things that are misunderstood. So I love this cartoon. It's one that I've used really since I've started here on campus, because there's a individual in a wheelchair, and he's got a body cast on, and then an individual standing next to the wheelchair, and they say, "Why don't you just try harder?" Well, we know that if he's broken his back or he's broken bones in his body, he can't just try harder and suck it up and be okay, right? But in mental health, we tend to see that a lot, right? I just need to suck it up. I just need to try harder. Or maybe even people are telling us that. Maybe that he's just sad, or just he has a lot of feelings, or she is always in her feelings, right? Those are things about mental health that tend to be stigmatizing. They're very discouraging for an individual. And luckily we're seeing less prevalence of that, but it is pretty prevalent still in our society. I thought it would be kind of interesting to put up some myths and then actual realities about mental health. And in doing that, I took myths that I heard pretty regularly here on our campus, usually from students, primarily from students, occasionally from faculty or staff, but mostly from students, and then kind of debunk those with the realities of the situation. So I think these are always kind of fun to look at. So what are some myths that we think about for mental health? I'm sure you all have some that you could think about that you think might be the case, but these are just a few examples. Number one, that the mental health concern, if you have a mental health concern, is going to be lifelong. So it's going to be something that's going to affect you for your whole life. Well, the reality of that situation is that more often than not, things are very short term. And when we talk about mental health, days, weeks, months are extremely common. So those are more common than something that's even really year long or lifelong. You think of things like generalized depression, generalized anxiety disorder. Those things can be very short term. They can be on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. So it's not always lifelong. Secondly, you have to see a psychiatrist. I couldn't find a good quality cartoon, but I like the Peanuts, where there's kind of a little guy that says psychiatrists help 5 cents. So when we think about mental health, a lot of times we think needing to go see a psychiatrist. So there are many different disciplines of mental health professionals. I happen to be a licensed social worker. There's licensed professional counselors. There's licensed marriage and family therapists. There's licensed alcohol and drug counselors. And we kind of like to joke that we love alphabet. So we like to put a lot of letters after our last name for those working in the mental health field. But it does not have to be a psychiatrist, right? And a lot of treatment has changed since then. No ink blots, no laying on a couch with a clipboard, anything like that. There are people that do that. It's just not the norm. Number 3, I hear a lot is that I must take medication if I have a mental health concern. Occasionally things can be improved with positive coping skills, therapy, group counseling, things like that, where medication really isn't required. And certain occasions, medication is supportive of mental health concerns that come up, but it's not the end all be all. And I think that's really highly misunderstood currently in our society. And lastly, I'm going to have to receive inpatient treatment, otherwise called EODing. People think of it more like being detained. If treatment is required, outpatient is the most common by and far. We don't do a lot of things great here in the state of Oklahoma. We are not awesome at a lot of stuff. In fact, if you look at a lot of our ratings, we're in the 40s states, high 40s. But believe it or not, as far as mental health goes, we do really well for the mental health services that we provide as a state. And because of that, one thing that we do is we provide great outpatient treatment for individuals here in the state. So there's options for that. There's intensive outpatient. So the first, in some instances, inpatient treatment is called for, but it's not by and far the large percentage of mental health concerns. So these are just some of the myths and some of the actual realities of how things are. And I kind of think that they go to show how stigmatized, how misunderstood some mental health conditions can be and what that looks like. Just a few facts about mental health, quick facts. Most mental health concerns first show up between the ages of 17 to 23. And if, in case you're doing the math, that's when a lot of people are starting to go out on their own. They're having to make a lot of hard decisions on their own. A lot more stress comes at this time. You start being classified as an adult. And so this is when we start to see a lot of things start popping up. And as you know, at a university level, this is when we start seeing people usually come in to start classes, right? If they're not doing concurrent. So 17, 18, 19 years old, those kinds of things really line up well. We also know that our mental health is regularly impacted by what is going on around us. Just as individuals, we're kind of like sponges. So we tend to really take in what's going on around us and the things that are happening, whether we feel like it's bouncing off of us or not. It really can affect us. And those are things like trauma, social struggles, relationship issues, grief, loss, and change. Changes are really hard for people. And those are issues that we see really impacting our mental health. Oklahoma consistently ranks high for the prevalence of mental health concerns as compared to other states. I talked about how well and how good the services are here in the state of Oklahoma. That doesn't take away from the fact that we have a lot of need. I think the last time I looked it up, we were like 47 or 48 out of 50 as far as the prevalence of mental health issues or concerns in the state. Worldwide, about 1 in 8 people experience a mental health concern at any given time. Here in the state of Oklahoma, that number is 1 in 5. So you can see those percentages a little bit higher. So at any given time, we can easily assume that 20% of the population is experiencing some type of mental health concern. Okay, just moving on. Suicide. Suicide is one of those topics that is never fun to talk about. It's a piece of my job that I don't enjoy talking about. It's a very sad reality. I think it's one of the toughest things that we address as mental health professionals, but it's a significant issue that we experience here in our society. So a little bit about suicide. In 2020, an estimated 12.2 million Americans seriously considered suicide. 3.2 million planned an attempt and 1.2 million attempted. So we can see that those are fairly significant numbers. And I do want to draw your attention to that this was for 2020. So this was non-pandemic, only a tiny bit of the pandemic. So we're kind of waiting on those numbers for 2021 to come out, and they are expecting those to be much higher. So even though these are pretty high numbers, we're expecting those to be higher. Suicide is in the top leading causes of death for the age group 10 to 64. So that's, between the ages of 10 and 64, however you want to break those age ranges down, suicide is in the top 10 causes of death for every one of those age ranges. Additionally, it's in the second leading cause of death for those between the ages of 10 to 14 and 25 to 34. I didn't include it on this, but the demographic with the highest number of suicides per capita is men like 45 to 55. So that's where we really see a pretty significant high number of suicides. Signs that someone may be considering suicide, things that you can really look for. Someone who's presenting is really overly anxious, really nervous. They might be casually mentioning or downplaying suicide. They may bring it up to you randomly to kind of get your reaction to see, how you're going to react to that situation. Giving away possessions is a big sign, kind of wrapping up loose ends. In cases like that, we've heard of of individuals saying like, I'm breaking my lease, or I'm paying off my lease and I'm not re-upping my lease, but they don't have somewhere else to move to. Those kinds of things that can really show that like, hey, okay, well, they're acting like they're not going to be here in a month. So that's a little concerning. Excessive use of drugs or alcohol, especially if that's not in that person's normal functioning. A lot of this can be contributed to kind of getting up that courage to be able to attempt. And so those are all things that we really want to be on the lookout for. There are a few options for getting services for these individuals. I put on this slide, there's Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number has actually transitioned now to 988. So if anybody is needing support, they can just pick up the phone, any cell phone, and call 988, can't talk, in Oklahoma, and they will be connected directly to resources for them. If they are on our campus here at OSU-OKC, we have a Call SAM number that they can call, which they'll be connected 24 hours to a licensed mental health professional. I'll have that number at the end of our talk. So yeah, those are some options for that too. So when we think about just general mental health, how do we know if somebody's in need? Right? We think that something will be really easily identifiable, especially if it's somebody that we know really well. We think that we're going to know really easily if they're going through something. But that's not always the case. People can hide things really easily. They can keep that kind of under wraps, but some stuff that will show on the outside are individuals that are becoming more and more isolated, unkempt, or irritable, especially this is out of the ordinary for them. Maybe they're really punctual, maybe they're really social, and then all of a sudden they're isolated. That can be kind of a sign that they're going through something. Academic or work performance deteriorates and is out of the ordinary. Maybe they might be classified as someone who works really, really well, really, really hard, but they're not anymore. And I'm talking like it'll drop off really quickly. They might express hopelessness or that there's no reason to continue. Kind of goes along with feeling suicidal. May have excessive absences or missed appointments out of the blue. They may not show up. They may be kind of like a no call, no show situation. And lastly, just trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, there's a good chance that something may be off. But when we'll talk briefly here in a second about how to approach that, you may be really the first person to hear about what somebody's going through. So this could be things like a loss in the family, a traumatic event, major change. Just trust your gut. And it's always okay to ask. And there are ways to ask that. So this is a question I get a lot, especially here on our campus, usually from our faculty and staff, is how can you help? And that's a great question. And I really love that question because it shows like, hey, I really want to be there for someone. And there's a right and a wrong way to do that. And I think that a really important first step in thinking about how you can help is to think about your comfort level. Right? If someone approached you with a concern, right? Maybe they had a loss in their family, maybe their marriage is really having problems or they're having financial trouble. If someone approached you with that, would you be comfortable talking to them about it? And it doesn't have to be like a close friend. It could be like just a coworker. And if you do, that's great. And if you don't, that's great too. That's okay. But that will help you to tailor your response and how you can interact with that person. So if you feel comfortable approaching an individual or talking to them about their mental health concern, here's some things to keep in mind. You really want to meet privately. If they start bringing up something to you, make sure it's in private. Make sure it's not in front of a team or a lot of other people, just so that they cannot feel embarrassed. They can feel open to talk. Maintain a positive tone. Tone goes a really long way, just kind of like our body language does. So if you're interested and you care about how they're doing, use a positive tone. And I am happy to instruct any of you all more on this issue too, if you're interested in learning how to use tone and body language to be successful with this. Point out what's going on, so kind of state what you've observed. I've noticed lately that you're seeming really sad, or I've noticed lately that you missed a lot of work, or I noticed lately that you seem like a little distracted. Are you okay? Asking open-ended questions is really important there. So how are things going? How have things been? Right? This is just a question that's more than a yes or no answer. And then encourage a response. Like, tell me more about that. Tell me how things are going. Tell me what's going on. And then you can kind of restate and summarize what you heard by including concern. So what do you need to get back on a healthy path? Like, is there something that I can do for you? Is there somewhere I can refer you to? And that helps them to really see that you are listening, engaged in what's going on. Your role, I think, is really to listen. So you want to be a friendly ear and empathize. The main difference between empathy and sympathy is you actually care about how that person's feeling. Normalize, acknowledge their feelings as important and real without judgment. So, hey, you know what? I'm so sorry that that's happening, but it's okay. We're going to figure it out. Set limits. This is a really key piece that I talk with our faculty a lot here on campus, is that if the support you can provide is not enough, that's okay, right? If you don't feel qualified to handle an issue, that's okay, right? We don't want you doing more than you're comfortable doing and getting in a position where you're kind of in over your head. Have options to be able to refer that out. And that's kind of the next step, is to identify a support network of things that you can do. And, you can have some ideas in your head that if somebody approached you, this is maybe where I would send them, just so that if something comes up, you're ready. And definitely don't judge somebody who expresses concern. That's a really key piece. It's very hard for somebody to approach someone to talk about an issue already, and we don't want to discourage that at all, because that may be the time where they say, okay, you know what, it took me a week to get up the courage to be able to talk to somebody, and they shot me down. So we really want to destigmatize that and just be open to what somebody may have to say. All right. So maintaining our own mental health is really more important than being able to interact with others in their mental health. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of our own mental health. And this is something that you hear me harp on all the time. Right. And you probably get sick of it because I tell you all the time. But it's really important to be mindful of this. This can really help us to better cope with stress, increase our productivity, meet goals, and function at a higher level. Right. So these are all things that I would assume that we all want to do. Right. We all want to be in a really good headspace and be in a position where we're feeling good. So how do we do that? It's kind of like the $1 million question, is that how do I take care of my mental health? Well, there's no right or wrong answer with that either. I think that if I had one thing to tell people to do and they just did that and things were rosy, then my job would be really easy. But it's not that simple. And a lot of times that's kind of a something we have to continuously change and evolve, because we as people grow and change no matter how old we get. So we have to look at the different things that we're doing and update those as we go. So these are some really good suggestions to think about when taking care of your mental health, because they're kind of time-tested things that work that you can implement pretty easily that will help. Self-care is the main one that we talk about all the time. So we think about taking time for yourself, trying a new hobby, resting, reading a book, getting a massage, all kinds of different things. The main thing we want to think about with self-care is that it needs to be within our means, right? If self-care is amazing and it's great, but it's also one of the ones that gets distorted the most. right? Like I can't do something just because I want to do it and just call it self-care if it's not beneficial to me. Like if money is tight for me and I'm having to budget, well, then my self-care activity probably shouldn't be going to the outlet mall and spending $400, right? Whereas that may be okay for somebody in a different position. So we want to look at what we can do based on our means. Secondly, it's really important to take care of our physical health. You can visit a wellness center, walk, eat nutritious meals, drink water, sleep, all those things that we think about as being good for us. It's a great way to jumpstart our mental health. Mental health and physical health, they're running buddies. They go together really well and hang out together. So if you take care of those, they mutually benefit each other. We can also be social. So seek supportive friends or family to spend time with. If needed, identify just one positive social outlet and avoid isolation. When we're going through things are really tough. Isolation is kind of the easy comfort zone for us. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just kind of what we feel comfortable doing. But we want to avoid that as best we can. So if we feel that start to come on, implement a few social activities that can be really helpful. Mindfulness is a great option too. We associate this with meditation. It's not always just meditation. It's about just being in the moment, making sure that we're doing okay in the moment, right? It could just be I stop at 11:30 before I go to lunch and I say, how am I feeling about this morning, right? That's a mindfulness activity. Set achievable and attainable goals. We want to identify goals for ourselves that are ambitious but not unachievable. If I have a goal that I want to exercise more, I know that 7 days a week is not going to happen for me. It's just not. So if I set that goal, I know that I'm probably not going to make it, and that's going to be discouraging for me. So identify goals that are going to challenge us, but that we're going to be able to meet too. And this is a really big one, but be comfortable with saying no to activities that are going to overload your schedule, right? If it's something that we can say no to, especially in our social life, do it, right? It's okay to do that, to be able to kind of take a breather. We've noticed kind of as COVID is ending and we're coming back to this new normal, that there's a little bit of like a fear of missing out or FOMO, and people are just jumping on activities as they come up, as many as they can kind of cram in. And so it's real to get overloaded. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're being realistic with our schedules. Break up your routine. Try driving a different way to work, eating lunch in a different spot. There's some things on our schedule we can't move, but things that we can control, change them around. And you'd be surprised how refreshed you can get from that. And lastly, this definitely isn't a DARE program, but you want to avoid alcohol and drugs. Keep that stuff to a minimum, alcohol use, and avoid drugs. It's kind of one of those things that we hear about all the time, but it really elevates our stress levels, and elevated stress levels are not good for our mental health. So these are just some examples that you can take and use today to start benefiting your mental health and how you're feeling overall. So just in a quick recap of what we talked about today, we talked about what is mental health, maybe challenging the definition that we have for ourselves. We've talked about, what are some myths and realities of mental health, what kinds of things affect our mental health, and how we can approach people if there is an issue, as well as how do we take care of our own mental health. So I hope this information was beneficial to you, that you're able to take it, kind of implement it and utilize it in your day-to-day functioning, because it's everywhere around us, right? It's something that's really not new. It's something that's been around for a really long time. It's just that the awareness is becoming more and more on that, and we want to make sure that we can, function effectively in dealing with mental health concerns, whether that's for ourselves or whether that's for other individuals around us. My contact information is listed here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help out. Located in the administration building the OSU-OKC campus, room 101. My email is here. I do offer appointments for faculty, staff, and students that are free of charge. And I'm happy to help out if anybody's in need or they have any questions. So I think that's what I got from my end.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Rosh. We really appreciate it.